Hello everyone, Phoenix Knight here. Welcome to the channel, and welcome to a new video on the channel. No gameplay on this one, but I did just play my last game for the month of March, which means it's time for my end of March recap. So I'm uploading the Hero Realms background campaign right now as I record this, but I will still talk about Hero Realms in this video. So we had Pandemic Month on the channel, along with a smorgasbord of other games on Wednesdays, and then we also had the first full month of Mystical Munchies on the channel. So with that, let's start the game recap with the first game we played for the month in Gaia Project. Gaia Project from Feuerland Spiel is advertised as a Terra Mystica game, where your goal is to create the best civilization in that universe based on the various actions that you take, which can potentially get you bonus victory points. And you're basically doing it it's a space version of Terra Mystica at its simplest core, essentially. Now, I featured Gaia Project on the channel multiple times, so obviously it's one I really enjoy. But this was the first time I featured Gaia Project as a Wednesday night video, where I wanted to see if Gaia Project to me was one of those edge cases where when I was first setting up the weeknight videos, where I thought it was a game that would work as a weeknight video, but I wanted to be sure of that. Plus, it helped me to kind of change up my routine a little bit during the week, where instead of getting my workout in on Wednesdays after work, I wake up at 4 a.m. to get my workout in. That way I'm not as constrained by time when I get home, and it's actually a little easier to get some of these edge games on the channel. But that's just random musing on that. So with some of these games that I featured multiple times on the channel, like I said, I'm obviously at a point where I enjoy them, so there's no real point in kind of singing their praises all over again. But so I think for those games, I'm going to do more of like a game recap on how it went for the month. So Gaia Project did actually work as a weeknight video, so it'll probably be featured in that. I'll probably alternate Gaia Project and Terra Mystica at the very least between the two. Like occasionally do it as a Wednesday video, occasionally do it as a Sunday video, that kind of thing, just to mix it up a little bit. So, like I said, we'll recap how the actual game went. So I deployed a Gaia Project strategy in that game, where I leaned more on my Gaia formers in that game. But the Gaia Project strategy kind of ended up being useless toward the end of the game. So I only really needed one Gaia former that entire game. But the Gaia Planet part of the strategy actually worked wonders for me, especially on turn 6 when the bonus action there was actually to put out more mines on Gaia planets. So I did end up winning that game. But Gaia Project will definitely hit the channel again. I've still got, I think, 4 more factions. Well, actually, I've got a lot more than that I still need to play against the Taklons before we move on to the next faction, but that's musing for another day. So with the musing on Gaia Project, let's actually move into the next group of games, and we'll start with the first of the new games to the channel in Star Wars: The Clone Wars. I lied a little bit, because we are going to start with Star Wars: The Clone Wars in the next part of the game recap. But before I jump into that, I do want to make some general comments about the Pandemic series and my mindset and how I look into which games I want to pick up. Pandemic as a series has always been a weird one for me, just because of a lot of that's because of when it caught my eye. So it kind of caught my eye right at the height of the COVID lockdowns back in 2020. At the time, the theme wasn't really appealing. It felt like it hit a little too close to home at the time. And mechanically, the Pandemic games all feel a bit samey, where you kind of move around a board managing smaller problems, whether you're looking at diseases, cultists, droids, barbarian tribes, or whatever, and trying to deal with your bigger problems, which is whether it's curing diseases, closing gates, or what else you might have to deal with. This makes the Pandemic games kind of a double-edged sword, and that their sameness actually does make them a little more accessible. But the reason this is kind of a double-edged sword is because once you've played one Pandemic game, you've kind of really played all of them, at least in my opinion, and from what I can see. So to that end, with the Pandemic system, I tend to look at the theme a little bit harder than I normally would. So under normal circumstances, when I look into a game for potential purchase, the theme actually does kind of catch my eye, but it's not that deciding. It's not usually a deciding factor in whether or not I grab a game. Where in the case of a game that's mechanically sound, but with maybe a little bit of, I don't know if sketchy is the word I want to use, but a theme that normally wouldn't appeal to me. I think that's how we'll put it. I can sometimes overlook the theme if the game is mechanically sound enough, and even maybe want to learn a little bit more about the theme of the game. But with the Pandemic system, because they're so samey, I think this is a series where I tend to look a little bit harder at the theme. So that's part of the reason why, despite having played Pandemic system games, probably, I would say almost nearing 10 times on the channel now, I'm not currently planning to feature base Pandemic on the channel. I also did forget how short these games can be. So with the spring campaign tending to be scheduled around this point of the year, and I don't like interrupting campaigns, I could probably move Pandemic Month to Wednesdays and do a longer spring campaign for Arkham Horror, the card game. But that's kind of enough general rambling on the Pandemic series. So going back to Star Wars The Clone Wars, I did enjoy this one for being a Pandemic system game. And I think the various villains in the box, so in addition to Asajj Ventress, you also have Count Dooku, General Grievous, and Maul in the box. So I think you get a little more replayability out of having those various villains in the box. It does feel, I would say, just a touch easier, but one thing you want to be aware of is that you might end up getting Planet Under Siege a little more often, which is this game's Outbreak, because the villain deck only has 6 cards in it. So you'll be cycling through it more often, to where you will end up drawing Planet Under Siege more often. But that's just kind of a general musing on that. Next up, we had another new game to the channel in the Hunters. The Hunters from GMT Games takes you into a submarine, into a German U-boat actually, and dumps you into the middle of the various waterways in World War II Europe. So your goal is to destroy Allied shipping by sinking whatever transport ships you can find that are carrying such and such cargo. Now I really enjoyed this game, as was evidenced by the fact that I decided to take it out twice on the channel. I had the scheduled playthrough of it at the start of the month, and then when I had the Friday off last week, I decided to bring it out again for an impromptu second patrol on that. Now, the narrative in that game is actually very easy to craft, so you can work it into, like, hey, I was out on patrol, I encountered this ship, such and such, sunk it, had to escape from a convoy, whatever. So narrative is very easy to craft, and it's actually very immersive in that regard. I did find it a little bit annoying to have to roll for everything. It felt like it was a little bit on the time-consuming side, but I find it adds so much to the theme in this case, where you have to roll for everything because you don't really know what you're encountering down there. For all you know, you might have a convoy of small freighters, and you're like, I'm just going to pass this up. Or you get a lone tanker, and you're like, ooh, num-nums. I can go ahead and sink that from nice and close. So but I think I can step into this as probably additional background content on the channel, similar to what I'm doing with the Hero Realms background campaign, where I don't have anything else going on. Hey, let's go for a few patrols in the Hunters. And the beautiful thing about this game is I can actually control the length of the video a lot more easily than with some of these other games. By, hey, I want a shorter video, I'll just go out on fewer patrols. Or, hey, I want a longer video on a Sunday, I'll just go out on more patrols. So it's actually really easy to control the length of the video that way. Now, this wasn't actually on my TAC Up Wargaming list, but it very well might be next year, assuming I decide to pursue the challenge again. Next up, we're going to go back to the Pandemic series with Pandemic Fall of Rome. Pandemic Fall of Rome is another one from Z-Man Games, where you get dumped into ancient Rome playing various leaders, and your goal is to is either forge alliances with or destroy all of the barbarian tribes, the Ostrogoths, the Huns and Vandals, and I forget what the other tribes are. I'm not going to go dig the box out to see what they all are. I did enjoy this game, but I'm starting to see how replayability is going to be a problem with this game, because your only goal is to avoid getting Rome sacked. So as long as you don't do that, you're fine. You can mix up the difficulty on that, but again, you're going to run into the same challenge of you're trying not to get Rome sacked. So my house rule actually did kind of make this game a little bit easy, where as long as both characters are on the same city or on the same space, you can trade any city you want. Whereas rules as written, you'd have to trade only that city. So if you're on, say, Caesar Augusta to do a trade, you could only trade Caesar Augusta. I never did like that rule, but I can see how the house rule actually makes it very easy. Next up, we'll go back to Wednesday night with another new game as we look at Red Rising. Red Rising from Stonemaier Games is a game where it's basically a handcraft where you're trying to craft the best hand of characters in the Red Rising universe with the goal of scoring victory points, in addition to also scoring for how much helium you have and how far on the fleet track you advanced. It is a good short game, so it's something I could probably come back to again on a Wednesday night. The theme, this is one of those games I was talking about where the theme is maybe a little bit suspect, because I've actually never done much with the Red Rising universe. I think there are like 4 or 5 novels out, and I've actually never read any of them. I don't think there are any movies out, so there's really not much I can get into. I did like how the Automa played. It was very smooth. There's also a die included in there, but I think you only use that when you scout, I want to say. But I forget how that all works out. But so yeah, the Rising die, like I said, was something I never really used in that playthrough. It's actually something I haven't really used very much, because usually I'm trying to improve my hand, get some of the stuff out, do some effect on the board, stuff like that. But let's go into another Pandemic game as we go into Pandemic: Reign of Cthulhu. Pandemic: Reign of Cthulhu is another Pandemic system game from Z-Man Games, where this time your goal is to seal the gates at the various locations in the Cthulhu mythos: Arkham, Innsmouth, Dunwich, and Kingsport, while you're trying to avoid having your investigators go insane, getting too many cultists or Shoggoths on the board, or awakening Cthulhu. Now, I really do enjoy this game, and unlike with Fall of Rome, where I think Fall of Rome really has a replayability issue, I think there's a little less of an issue with Reign of Cthulhu, and I'm not just saying that because I really like the theme of Reign of Cthulhu. So, in Reign of Cthulhu, you actually have the ancient ones that you have to put on the board on the summoning track, and the order of the ancient ones comes out can really mess with your game. Like Should-A-Mel came out first in the playthrough on the channel, and didn't really cause too many problems just because the Sanity came out early. Whereas usually in my other 2 playthroughs on the channel, Should-A-Mel came out late and stuck it to us in the end. Now, I did derp slightly and put the very last time I had to shuffle the discard pile for the cultists, I actually put that back on top of the discard pile. That actually did need to go back on the top of the deck, so that was a screw up on my part. And I probably would have lost, because I think I think that last Shoggoth, I want to say, ended up, if not on top of, then near one of the gates. So I think we would have had a Shoggoth move and awaken Cthulhu to end the game. And that being said, it can also be a little bit challenging due to having to manage the sanity, and getting your sanity back is actually fairly difficult, where the only way you can do that is an insane investigator closes one of the gates. So there's only, like I said, there's only one way to get your sanity back, so I can see that potentially being a problem. Now, one thing that actually is a potential problem with the Pandemic system is the chain overruns, or I forget what it's actually called, but I think it varies with the game. So there are actually no chain awakenings in this game, because when you fill a location up to 3 cultists, when you draw it again from the deck, you actually don't put that fourth cultist out, so the cultists don't actually spread over the board, which means you don't end up with a chain outbreak. So I think it's mitigated a little bit in that way. And similar to Fate of the Elder Gods, I can actually feature this game in a thematic way to select an opponent for one of my big Mythos campaigns with the bigger games, the Eldritch Horror, Arkham Horror 2nd Edition, and Elder Sign campaigns, aka the Summer of Lovecraft and Christmas in Arkham, depending on when I run those. Now, given that I've got the Fate of the Elder Gods tournament for Christmas in Arkham, I could use Pandemic Reign of Cthulhu for the Summer of Lovecraft to help me decide my opponent thematically. Because like in Fate of the Elder Gods, there are several ancient ones that actually cross all three games. And if I take out the ancient ones that I featured as opponents for those campaigns, I have just enough that I could run essentially a play-in game of Pandemic Reign of Cthulhu before the Summer of Lovecraft to help me determine what my ancient one is that I face for that. So that's enough on Pandemic Reign of Cthulhu. Next, let's go to our last new game for the month in Call to Adventure. Call to Adventure by Brotherwise Games is a game where you basically are building up a character who has the most destiny in their backstory. I do really like the theme of this one, but I can see how it's going to be probably going to be more useful to players of tabletop RPGs. Where if you combine this with another smaller game, Role Player, that I'm planning to feature on the channel later this year, you could actually use that to roll up an entire character. So in Role Player, you're trying to roll up your stats for your character. In Call to Adventure, you're actually trying to tell the backstory. Now, I'm usually pretty bad at telling some of these stories, and I did get a little bit annoyed with the cards that came out, but that's not a reflection on the game at all. That's just kind of the luck of the draw and how everything came out. I had a hard time with casting those runes, and the adversary did end up winning that game. Again, not a knock on the game. I really like this one, and I could see it hitting the channel again. But that's it on Call to Adventure. Next, let's move into World of Warcraft, Wrath of the Lich King Pandemic. World of Warcraft, Wrath of the Lich King Pandemic from Z-Man Games is where you're trying to stop the Lich King from overrunning Northrend, but you have to defeat 3 quests first, and then go into Icecrown Citadel and defeat the Lich King. Now, I mentioned earlier in the video, before I started talking about Star Wars The Clone Wars, about how the theme is a little bit more important when I'm looking at Pandemic games. And this is one of those games that was almost exclusively, I would say, a theme purchase. Because I played a lot of World of Warcraft back in ye olde and ancient times, and one of my very favorite expansions, if not my absolute favorite expansion, was actually Wrath of the Lich King, which is where kind of my altaholic lifestyle came in. But I can definitely see how replayability is very lacking. Where I also mentioned the Pandemic games being very samey. So you get that, I really get that feeling out of this game where you go do your 3 quests, then you go into Icecrown Citadel, you end up swarming ICC to fly through that quickly. So this is one of those games where I think replayability is going to be a huge problem. And even the difficulty I don't think is going to do much with it. But it was definitely a lot simpler to manage one hand for an entire team rather than having to manage them individually like for all of the others. And similar to Pandemic Reign of Cthulhu, you don't actually end up having any chain overruns. So you don't have them chaining out like crazy. Because similar to Reign of Cthulhu, when you get into a zone with 3 ghouls, you actually don't place the 4th ghoul. Instead, you just resolve the overrun and advance down the despair track. But as you saw in our playthrough, we actually very much kept the overruns under control in that video. So just something to keep an eye on there. Our last game for the month was actually the aforementioned video that I'm just going to be uploading here very shortly in my latest trek into the Hero Realms background campaign. Hero Realms is a game from Wise Wizard Games where you're trying to defeat whoever your adversary happens to be. The solo mode for this one is actually the aforementioned campaign that I've been running through, whereas for Star Realms it's just special challenges. Hero Realms does have its own special challenges with it, but the primary solo mode, like I said, is the campaign. Now, I really enjoy Hero Realms, and I think a lot of that is from also liking Star Realms. And the two are very easy to learn as long as you know the other one. So I picked up Star Realms first, and then got into Hero Realms. So the way I describe Hero Realms to people is it's Star Realms with a fantasy coat of paint. Whereas if you reverse that, you picked up Hero Realms first, and you look at Star Realms. Star Realms is just Hero Realms with a sci-fi coat of paint. So very easy to pick up. Some of the terminology is going to be a little bit different, but mechanically, the game will all be the same. Excuse me. Still kind of getting a little bit with a sore throat. But as far as the campaign goes, as far as the scenario goes, that will be uploaded by the time this video goes live. Just checking on the upload there. That was actually a pretty brutal scenario that we played through. We came close with it, but there was just way too much health to go through. So the second time I play that scenario, which as you recall, that's actually a house rule that I put in to deal with what I'm calling the treadmill experience, where you have to win a scenario to move on to the next one. Where if I lost a scenario twice or a total of 4 across the entire campaign, then I was going to wrap the campaign. So I'm actually on my second loss total through the campaign, but this was my first loss. So second loss on this scenario, we'll see the campaign wrap, and I'll take the wizard apart. But 120 health on Melvin the Beastmaker was just too much. I probably needed more healing. I tried to race, but obviously the race didn't work. So like I mentioned, the second loss will actually end the campaign on that. With that, that's all the games, so let's talk about Mystical Munchies. We had our first month of Mystical Munchies on the channel featuring the Dungeon Meister cookbook, and all the recipes actually turned out pretty well. So first up I made coconut chicken nuggets with tropical sauce, aka necklace of fireballs. And while the recipe seemed like it turned out fine, that batter was stupidly thick, where I think it probably is going to need more milk actually to make it a little bit easier to stir. Next up, we had the side, which was Summon Wall of garlic bread, aka stuffed garlic loaf. I did have to substitute the ciabatta bread for a regular French loaf, and I think that kind of caused a problem that kind of caused my opinion a little bit in how the stuffing part didn't turn out well at all. And it also felt like a garlic bread recipe to begin with, so that's probably a lot more effort than I'd want to put in for garlic bread. Maybe my opinion will be different if I'm actually able to find a ciabatta loaf of bread. So that one might be worth a retry, along with potentially the no-bake cookies, which I did last month. Then we had the entree, which was, what was the entree? It was roast porcus, which is garlic-studded pork tenderloin. That actually turned out really well. It was a fairly simple pork tenderloin recipe, so it's a good option to mix it up a little bit. Last recipe we made were the Spencer's Minty Disc, melted mint cookies, which those actually turned out great. I'm sure they're still moist, or at least not rock hard. They actually were pretty popular for the people who actually indulged in them at work, so I do have that to fall back on, but I'm not going to eat 80 cookies, not when I'm still trying to lose weight. I was down to, as of my last weigh-in on Saturday, I'm down to 201 pounds. So I'm making slow and steady progress on my weight loss journey. I still have about another 26-ish pounds to go before I get back down to where I really am happy to be. I'm not sure I'm going to get down to 175 again, just as I'm getting a little bit older and I'm finding it harder to lose weight. But we'll see how that goes. But that's it for Mystical Munchies, so let's look at what's coming up in April. We're not going to be playing as many games in April, but that's because it's time for the spring campaign in Arkham Horror, the card game. I'll have a more detailed intro up on Friday, but we're going to be going through Night of the Zealot as our spring campaign. Now, I do want to make this more of a learning campaign so the new players can follow along a little bit better. To that end, I'm going to try to be a little bit deeper in explanations about game situations and strategies in each situation. One of the challenges I'm going to have with this campaign is trying not to metagame too much. But I've run this campaign a lot. So I'm sure some of the metagaming will probably slip through the cracks despite my best efforts. But Wednesday we'll have another variety of games. So we're going to do another play along of Welcome To. And then we'll still have some new games to the channel in April. New to the channel on Wednesdays will be a game called Lucidity Six-Sided Nightmares and Tank on Tank Eastfront. Now, the last time we saw the Tank on Tank games, they were coming out of the box that ID Jester sent me back in January. So it'll be nice to start getting those on the channel. Even though we already got Metal Dawn on the channel, which was on the list, and yeah, the less said about that, the better. Anyway, we'll also play Call of Cthulhu Alone Against the Frost for a second time. And then last up to end of the month, after the spring campaign's over, we're going to commemorate the suicide of one of the most evil people to walk the planet in Adolf Hitler as the 6th game on the TACAP Wargaming list, and another new game to the channel takes center stage, Hitler's Reich from GMT Games. As you've seen on the channel, as long as I don't have a huge content black hole, I try to tie certain historical events to some part of their story. February was an exception since I had a huge content black hole coming out of the winter campaign, but moving forward, I'll try to be a little more picky about dates certain games get scheduled. As for Mystical Munchies, with 5 Saturdays in April, we'll need a drink recipe as well with the month of Mystical Munchies. Given that I try not to go near alcohol, finding non-alcoholic drinks that I like has been somewhat challenging, but I finally managed to find a few drink recipes that I actually like. One of them is in next month's cookbook, so speaking of the World of Warcraft, we'll actually be taking a step back to the world of Azeroth as we feature the World of Warcraft New Flavors of Azeroth cookbook. The first recipe will be the appetizer, spiced onion cheese, and that will come on Saturday. With that, let's go ahead and wrap this video up. That's the end of month recap for March. Later this weekend, we'll have the campaign intro for the spring campaign for Arkham Horror, the card game, and Wednesday we'll have our second play-along video of Welcome To, and I'll explain what I mean by a play-along when that video comes up. Thank you for watching the video. Please give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Be sure to turn on notifications so you get my content. Be well, stay safe, take care of yourselves and your loved ones, and I'll be back with more videos in the future. Until then, take care, everyone.